Think of the pantheon of cosmic horror. At the top, the outer gods, mindless, boundless forces like Azathoth and Nyarlathotep. But below them, sleeping in the dark places of our universe, are the operational horrors. The ones with forms we can almost comprehend, with cults we can almost understand, with a presence that stains our world directly. These are the great old ones. They are not all-powerful, but they are ancient, alien, and their mere existence is a threat to reality as we know it. Some slumber in sunken cities. Some are frozen in Antarctic ice. Some drift between the stars, waiting for the geometry of the cosmos to call them home. And not all of them are created equal. So today we ask, who among them truly holds the most power, the most influential, the most terrifying potential? Who is the apex predator of this alien pantheon? Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Because over the next 2 hours, we are doing something that would drive a Lovecraftian scholar mad. We are ranking the great old ones. This is not just a list. This is a systematic breakdown. We will assess each entity by their canonical power, their influence on humanity, their role in the cosmos, and their sheer conceptual horror. From the infamous dreamer in R'lyeh to the faceless lord of the air, from the dweller in the gulf to the demon sultan's crawling chaos, we will place them in order. We will separate the planetary threats from the galactic ones, the sleeping priests from the active corruptors. And by the end, you will understand not just who they are, but why their hierarchy of horror matters in a universe that wishes us only ignorance or annihilation. This is the definitive ranking, the final analysis of the things that wait in the dark. Let's begin. Howard Phillips Lovecraft never set out to create a pantheon. Between 1926 and his death in 1937, he populated his fiction with entities that defied the very concept of systematic theology. This was deliberate. Lovecraft was a philosophical materialist who viewed the universe as mechanistic and indifferent. His great old ones were not gods in any traditional sense. They were forces, remnants, cosmic accidents, beings whose existence predated human consciousness and would persist long after our extinction. The term Great Old Ones appears sporadically across Lovecraft's work, never clearly defined. In The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, they are ancient beings who came from the stars and now lie dormant. In At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, the phrase refers to the Elder Things, a completely different species. This inconsistency was not carelessness. Lovecraft deliberately avoided codifying his mythology. He understood that systematic explanation diminishes cosmic horror. The moment you can diagram a pantheon, chart its hierarchies, and understand its rules, you have domesticated the unknowable. Lovecraft's literary circle, the Calum Club and later correspondence, participated in building this pseudo-mythology. Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, August Derleth, and others borrowed Lovecraft's entities and invented their own. This collaborative world-building created something unusual in pulp fiction, a shared universe that felt archaeological rather than authored. When multiple writers reference the Necronomicon or mention Yog-Sothoth in passing, the cumulative effect suggests these horrors exist independent of any single creator's imagination. The economic context matters here. Lovecraft wrote for pulp magazines like Weird Tales, which paid poorly and published monthly. This format encouraged serialization and cross-referencing. Readers who encountered Cthulhu in one issue might find Nyarlathotep mentioned 6 months later in a different story by a different author. The gaps between publications became spaces where mythology could ferment in readers' minds. The Lovecraft never earned more than a few $100s from his fiction during his lifetime. He died believing his work would be forgotten. The irony is that his poverty-driven fragmentation became the source of his mythology's power. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft's reluctance to systematize was philosophical, not merely aesthetic. He rejected the occult revival happening around him. Theosophy, spiritualism, ceremonial magic. These movements sought hidden knowledge, cosmic order, human significance within universal schemes. Lovecraft inverted this entirely. His great old ones offer no wisdom, no enlightenment, no place for humanity in their designs. They are the opposite of esoteric revelation. They are the confirmation of our irrelevance. Lovecraft did not invent cosmic horror. He synthesized it from specific literary and philosophical sources that shaped his particular vision of malevolent enormity. Arthur Macon's The Great God Pan, 1894, introduced the idea of nature deities as fundamentally hostile to human consciousness. Machen's Pan is not the benevolent woodland spirit of classical mythology, but something ancient and terrible that human minds cannot process without fracturing. This inversion of pastoral divinity, nature as threat rather than sanctuary, became central to Lovecraft's approach. Where Machen suggested horror lurking behind the veil of nature, Lovecraft extended this to the cosmos itself. Lord Dunsany influenced Lovecraft more directly than any other writer. Dunsany's gods are distant, capricious, and utterly unconcerned with human morality. In The Gods of Pegana, 1905, divine beings create and destroy worlds on aesthetic whims. They exist in dimensions humans can barely conceptualize. Lovecraft absorbed this model of deity as incomprehensibility and stripped away even Dunsany's aesthetic concerns. Where Dunsany's gods might be indifferent artists, Lovecraft's great old ones are not artists at all. They simply exist, vast and terrible, their purposes, if they have purposes, utterly opaque. Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow, 1895, provided the template for deity as concept. The King in Yellow is never fully explained or described. It exists as play, as character, as presence, as infectious idea. This ambiguity terrified readers more effectively than any detailed monster description could. Lovecraft recognized this technique and employed it ruthlessly. Cthulhu is described physically in The Call of Cthulhu, yet the description fails to capture what Cthulhu actually is. Form and essence remain disconnected. The scientific context of the 1920s fundamentally shaped Lovecraft's cosmic vision. Einstein's relativity had recently restructured human understanding of space and time. Astronomy was revealing the scale of the universe, distances so vast they rendered human civilization a temporal blip. Lovecraft read science voraciously and grasped the philosophical implications. If the universe operated according to mechanistic laws across unimaginable scales, then human consciousness was an accident. Moral frameworks were local delusions, and cosmic indifference was the only honest theology. This was Nietzsche's death of God extended into material reality. Nietzsche proclaimed God's death as cultural fact. Lovecraft imagined what might fill the vacancy. Not benevolent replacement, not human potential unleashed, but the discovery that vast entities existed all along in cosmic regions our previous frameworks had obscured. The great old ones are what you find when you remove anthropocentric divinity and look at the universe as it actually is. Theosophy and the occult revival of the late 19th and early 20th centuries also shaped Lovecraft's work through inversion. Madame Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, and others sought hidden cosmic knowledge that would elevate human consciousness. They believed secret masters, astral planes, and esoteric wisdom awaited the initiated. Lovecraft took this structure, hidden knowledge, ancient entities, secret texts, and removed all redemptive possibility. His forbidden knowledge drives readers mad, not because it is complex, but because it reveals our cosmic insignificance. The Necronomicon offers no path to enlightenment, only confirmation that enlightenment is a provincial human concept. Colonial anxieties pervaded popular culture during Lovecraft's era. Stories of primitive peoples worshipping strange gods filled adventure magazines and anthropological accounts. Lovecraft, unfortunately, absorbed the racist assumptions of his time and class. His stories often depict non-European cultures as vectors for cosmic contamination. This racism is real, documented, and indefensible. Yet the literary mechanism he developed, the idea that certain peoples retained knowledge of pre-human realities, has been separated from its racist origins by later writers. The great old ones now serve authors across cultures precisely because cosmic indifference transcends human categories, including race. Lovecraft crafted his mythology through linguistic estrangement. The names of his great old ones resist easy pronunciation, their etymologies deliberately obscured. This was not affectation, but technique. Consider Cthulhu, the most famous of the great old ones. Lovecraft specified that the name cannot be pronounced by human vocal organs. He offered approximations, Cthulhu, 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 acknowledging that all are failures. The glottal and guttural sounds suggest something organic, yet alien, a vocalization produced by a throat structure fundamentally unlike ours. This phonetic impossibility serves a purpose. It renders the entity linguistically inaccessible. You cannot master what you cannot name correctly. The term Great Old Ones itself creates taxonomic confusion. Lovecraft also wrote of elder gods, outer gods, and old ones, without clearly distinguishing between them. August Derleth later imposed a systematic hierarchy. Outer gods were ultimate cosmic forces, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth. Elder gods were benevolent opposites, and great old ones were imprisoned servants. This neat categorization contradicts Lovecraft's own ambiguous usage. In At the Mountains of Madness, the Old Ones refer to the elder things, ancient terrestrial colonizers, not cosmic entities at all. This terminological slippage is not accident. Lovecraft understood that ambiguity preserves horror. Fixed definitions enable comprehension. Shifting categories maintain unease. When readers cannot determine whether Cthulhu is a high priest serving greater powers or himself a god-level entity, the uncertainty becomes part of the dread. Lovecraft invented languages to accompany his mythology. Riliehian, the language associated with Cthulhu, appears in fragments. Finglui mgulwinaf, Cthulhu Rilieh, Wagahnagul Ftagn. In his house at Rilieh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The phonetic density, clusters of consonants, apostrophes suggesting glottal stops, creates an impression of depth without actual linguistic structure. Lovecraft never developed Riliehian as a functional language. He generated sounds that suggested alien vocal apparatus and inhuman thought patterns. Aklo, borrowed from Arthur Machen, appears in several stories as a primal language predating human speech. When human characters encounter Aklo inscriptions, they experience visceral revulsion before intellectual comprehension. The language itself carries psychic weight, as if certain phonetic combinations can damage consciousness. This idea, that some knowledge exists in forms toxic to human cognition, runs throughout Lovecraft's linguistic strategies. Why do certain letter combinations recur in Lovecraft's invented names? The prevalence of GH, Thi, PH, Darji, and multiple apostrophes creates consistent alien atmosphere. These combinations are pronounceable, barely, but uncomfortable. They force the tongue and throat into unusual positions, making readers physically aware of the strangeness. The apostrophes in names like Yhanthle or Yog-Sothoth suggest syllables our language lacks symbols for, gaps in human phonetic capability. The absence of true names is itself significant. In many magical traditions, knowing something's true name grants power over it. Lovecraft inverts this. His entities lack true names because they pre-exist language itself. What we call Cthulhu is an approximation, a human attempt to label something that has no need of labels. The linguistic inadequacy is the point. We cannot name them accurately because accurate naming would require conceptual frameworks we do not possess. Lovecraft's greatest innovation was not creating monsters, but creating the illusion of archaeological discovery. His great old ones feel researched rather than invented, because he embedded them in a fictional scholarly apparatus that mimics academic authority. The Necronomicon is central to this technique. Supposedly written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred in 730 CE, translated into Greek as Necronomicon in 950 CE, then into Latin by Olaus Wormius in 1228, the book appears across Lovecraft's fiction as the ultimate repository of forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft invented its complete publication history, the Greek text burned by Patriarch Michael in 1050, the Latin edition printed in Germany in the 15th century, only 5 copies surviving into the modern era. This detailed provenance suggests real scholarship. Readers encountering the Necronomicon in multiple stories by multiple authors began to wonder if it actually existed. It does not. Lovecraft created it in a 1927 letter, initially as a joke. But the joke metastasized. He developed a bibliography of fictional occult texts. Unaussprechlichen Kulten by Friedrich von Junst, De Vermis Mysteries by Ludwig Prien, Cultes des Ghouls by Comte d'Erlette. Each receives similar scholarly treatment, dates, editions, translations, references, and other fictional works. The cumulative weight of this cross-referencing creates textual reality. Lovecraft's correspondents adopted and expanded this technique. Robert E. Howard referenced the Necronomicon in his stories. Clark Ashton Smith invented the Book of Ibon and allowed Lovecraft to cite it. August Derleth continued the practice after Lovecraft's death. This collaborative expansion meant that readers in the 1930s encountered these texts across different magazines, in stories by different authors, treating them as established fact within the fiction. The shared universe emerged organically. The invented scholars deserve attention. Abdul al-Hazred, the Necronomicon's author, supposedly went mad from his researches and was devoured by invisible monsters in a Damascus marketplace in 738 CE. Friedrich von Junst, author of Unaussprechlichen Kulten, was strangled by unseen hands in 1840. These biographies follow a pattern. The researcher discovers terrible truth, attempts to record it, and is destroyed by the knowledge or the entities it concerns. This pattern warns readers while simultaneously authenticating the forbidden texts. Why would anyone fabricate their own destruction? Lovecraft established flexible rules for his mythology precisely by refusing to establish firm ones. He contradicted himself between stories. Cthulhu's appearance varies slightly across descriptions. The relationship between different entities remains unclear. Derleth later imposed rigid structure, his elemental system categorizing great old ones as fire, water, earth, or air entities, with benevolent elder gods opposing them. This systematization has been largely rejected by Lovecraft scholars and later writers. It domesticates the cosmic through comprehensible categories. The power of Lovecraft's approach lies in its incompleteness. Each story provides fragments of a larger pattern that is never fully revealed. Readers glimpse connections, infer hierarchies, construct mental maps of the mythology. But Lovecraft never confirms these constructions. The great old ones remain partially obscured, their true nature suggested rather than explained. This restraint distinguishes cosmic horror from fantasy world building. Fantasy creates comprehensive mythologies to be explored. Cosmic horror creates fragmentary mythologies that resist completion. Why does this mythology feel discovered? Because Lovecraft mimicked the structure of actual mythology and archaeological research. Real ancient texts survive in fragments. Real mythological systems contain contradictions. Real historical records have gaps. By replicating these characteristics, Lovecraft made his invented mythology feel like genuine, recovered knowledge. The gaps are not failures of imagination, but simulations of how knowledge actually survives across time. Incomplete, contradictory, haunting. The great old ones embody specific philosophical positions rendered as narrative, horror. They are not metaphors for these positions. They are these positions made flesh, or something approximating flesh. Understanding what they represent requires examining the conceptual architecture Lovecraft built into their very existence. Cosmic indifference stands as the foundational principle. The great old ones do not hate humanity. They do not love us, fear us, or acknowledge us as categorically distinct from any other biological configuration. This is not the indifference of a distant god who might be petitioned or angered into attention. This is the indifference of physical law, of entropy, of the distance between stars. Cthulhu dreams in Relaye not because he chooses imprisonment, but because geometric and temporal configurations currently prevent his activity. When those configurations shift, he will act, not out of malice toward humanity, but because his nature will resume its expression. We are irrelevant to this resumption. Scale inversion operates throughout Lovecraft's conception of these entities. In traditional horror, humans occupy center stage with monsters as intruders into our world. The great old ones invert this entirely. They are the native reality. Humanity is the intrusion, the temporary local phenomenon. Consider the temporal scale. Cthulhu's city Arlie sank beneath the Pacific before human civilization existed. The great old ones moved between worlds when Earth was still cooling. They will remain when our species is geological sediment. This temporal vastness renders human history, all of it, from first tool use to present moment, a brief flicker in an immense darkness. The scale inversion extends to biology. Lovecraft frequently describes humans as microbes from the perspective of these entities. In The Call of Cthulhu, when Cthulhu briefly emerges, the sailors who encounter him are not warriors facing a dragon. They are insects observing weather patterns. Their weapons, courage, and intentions mean nothing. The only Reason they survive is that Cthulhu returns to dormancy due to factors unrelated to their resistance. Human agency evaporates at this scale. Mechanistic universe finds its purest expression in Azathoth, the blind idiot god at the center of ultimate chaos. Azathoth is not evil. Azathoth is not conscious in any sense we recognize. Azathoth is the nuclear chaos from which reality bubbles, mindless and eternal. If the universe has a creator in Lovecraft's cosmology, it is this: purposeless, idiotic, demon sultan. The traditional theological argument from design, that universal order implies divine intelligence, collapses entirely. Order is local and temporary. Azathoth represents the underlying reality: chaos without intention, creation without meaning. Yog-Sothoth embodies a different philosophical terror: totality without benevolence. Described as coterminous with all time and space, Yog-Sothoth knows everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen. This is not omniscience in the divine sense, knowledge deployed for moral purpose. This is omniscience as fact, as state of being. Yog-Sothoth is the gate and the key, the threshold between dimensions. All knowledge exists within Yog-Sothoth, but this knowledge serves no salvific function. You cannot pray to totality. You can only be subsumed by it. Intelligence without mercy finds its avatar in Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. Unlike other great old ones, Nyarlathotep appears actively engaged with humanity. He takes multiple forms: the black man of the witch's Sabbath, the howling chaos of the desert, the messenger of the outer gods. But this engagement is not relationship. Nyarlathotep seems to enjoy chaos the way a child enjoys breaking toys. He is the only great old one who appears to possess something like personality, and that personality is characterized by deliberate cruelty. This makes him more terrifying than the indifferent entities. Indifference can be navigated through insignificance. Malicious intelligence notices you. The collapse of dream and reality structures several of Lovecraft's stories involving the great old ones. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter pursues a vision through dream realms where the boundaries between subjective experience and objective reality dissolve. The implication is that what we call reality may itself be the dream of Azathoth, or an unstable projection of forces we cannot perceive directly. If Cthulhu waits dreaming, then what is the ontological status of those dreams? Are they contained mental events or creative forces shaping reality itself? Lovecraft refuses to clarify, leaving readers suspended between metaphysical possibilities. Mathematical and geometric wrongness pervades descriptions of Great Old One, architecture, and biology. R'lyeh is non-Euclidean, its angles defying rational geometry. When characters encounter these spaces, they experience physical disorientation, nausea, vertigo, the sense that gravity operates according to different rules. This is not supernatural magic, but suggestion that our physical laws are local constraints, not universal truths. The great old ones exist according to mathematical principles we lack frameworks to comprehend. Their geometry is not wrong. Our geometry is insufficient. Organizing the great old ones requires acknowledging that Lovecraft himself never provided definitive taxonomy. What follows represents one possible categorization based on textual evidence and relative cosmic significance. This is not canon. Lovecraft's mythology resists canonization, but a functional framework for understanding hierarchical relationships. Outer gods represent ultimate cosmic principles. They operate at scales and in dimensions that make planetary concerns irrelevant. They are not imprisoned, dormant, or constrained. They simply are. Azathoth occupies the nominal apex, described as the demon sultan at the center of ultimate chaos. Lovecraft places Azathoth in the dream quest of unknown Kadath, at the center of infinity, surrounded by servitor entities who pipe mindlessly to prevent some catastrophic awareness. The mythology suggests that if Azathoth ever achieved consciousness or focused attention, reality itself might cease. This positions Azathoth as the least anthropomorphic entity in the entire mythology. Pure force without intention, creation without design. The piping flutes and amorphous dancers surrounding Azathoth serve critical symbolic function. They represent the maintenance of cosmic oblivion. Consciousness in this framework is not the universe becoming aware of itself, but a dangerous aberration that must be kept fragmented. This inverts Enlightenment philosophy entirely. Reason does not illuminate. Reason is the local error, the temporary glitch in an otherwise perfectly mindless cosmic mechanism. Yog-Sothoth functions as the gate and the key, existing outside normal spacetime while simultaneously coterminous with all of it. In the Dunwich Horror, Wilbur Whateley's grandfather summons Yog-Sothoth to father hybrid offspring. The ritual succeeds because Yog-Sothoth is always accessible, not spatially present, but dimensionally adjacent. Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. This positioning makes Yog-Sothoth the threshold entity, the principle by which other dimensions impinge on ours. Textual evidence suggests Yog-Sothoth possesses something closer to intention than Azathoth. The procreation in the Dunwich Horror implies purpose, or at least response to invocation. Yet what Yog-Sothoth wants remains obscure. The twin Whateley brothers represent different aspects of their father's nature, one semi-human, one purely monstrous. Neither serves comprehensible purpose. They exist, grow, and eventually attempt to open gateways for reasons the text never fully explains. Great Old Ones constitute a second tier, still vast, still ancient, but imprisoned or dormant rather than freely active. These entities once moved freely through the cosmos, but now wait, constrained by temporal cycles, geometric configurations, or deliberate imprisonment by other forces. Cthulhu dominates this category through cultural prominence despite limited textual appearances. The Call of Cthulhu remains Lovecraft's most famous story, and the entity itself has become synonymous with cosmic horror. Yet within Lovecraft's own work, Cthulhu appears directly in only one story. His power derives from suggestion, from the global cult that senses his dreaming, from the promise of awakening. Relier, Cthulhu's sunken city, embodies architectural wrongness. The geometry defies Euclidean principles. Walls meet at angles that seem obtuse and acute simultaneously. This mathematical impossibility is not metaphor. Lovecraft suggests that Relier exists according to spatial laws we cannot perceive directly. Our sensory apparatus translates these spaces into contradictory data, producing the physical and mental distress characters experience when encountering them. In his house at Relier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming, functions as koan. Is Cthulhu dead? The text suggests death operates differently for these entities. Traditional death is cessation. Cthulhu's death is dormancy, a state from which awakening remains possible. This undercuts the finality that makes death meaningful in human terms. If death is temporary, if waiting in death is equivalent to sleeping, then the category loses its boundary. Cthulhu is neither alive in our sense nor permanently dead. He persists. The story's conclusion reinforces cosmic indifference. After the Norwegian sailors ram their ship through Cthulhu's head, the entity reforms and returns to R'lyeh not because defeated, but because the geometric moment for full awakening has not yet arrived. Human resistance accomplished nothing. The stars were not right. When they are right, Cthulhu will rise regardless of human opposition. Nyarlathotep occupies a unique position as the only Great Old One who appears actively engaged with humanity across multiple forms and multiple stories. He is the crawling chaos, the haunter of the dark, the black man at the witch's sabbath, the faceless god. This multiplicity suggests either multiple aspects of a single entity or a single principle manifesting according to contextual need. Unlike the dormant Great Old Ones, Nyarlathotep moves freely. He appears in Egypt in Nyarlathotep, 1920, demonstrating technologies that drive observers mad. He manifests in Providence, Rhode Island, in the Haunter of the Dark, as an entity bound to a specific artifact. The geographical range and temporal span of his activities mark him as uniquely active within Lovecraft's pantheon. What makes Nyarlathotep truly disturbing is the suggestion of personality. He seems to enjoy chaos. When he demonstrates his technologies in Nyarlathotep, the text describes his cruel smile, his deliberate manipulation of observers' sanity. This is not cosmic indifference, but focused malice. Nyarlathotep notices humans, and his notice is worse than being ignored. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, represents fertility inverted into horror. Traditional fertility deities embody creation, nurture, the positive valence of reproduction. Shub-Niggurath embodies fecundity as nightmare, endless generation without purpose, breeding as cosmic principle detached from meaning. The 1,000 young are not cherished offspring, but products, iterations, spawn. Lovecraft himself rarely features Shub-Niggurath directly in stories. The entity appears primarily through cultist invocations and references in forbidden texts. This absence makes Shub-Niggurath almost purely conceptual. The idea of procreation as horror rather than dramatized entity. Later writers have expanded the role significantly, but in Lovecraft's original work, Shub-Niggurath remains deliberately vague. The gendered language, black goat, maternal associations, deserves examination. Lovecraft's horror frequently centers on reproduction, heredity, and biological contamination. Shub-Niggurath channels anxieties about uncontrolled generation, about fertility detached from human frameworks of family and purpose. This connects to broader themes in Lovecraft's work: the Innsmouth hybrids, the Whately twins, the degeneration of bloodlines. Generation becomes corruption. Lesser cataloged entities include Hastur, Ithaqua, Tsathoggua, Dagon, and others mentioned in passing, or developed primarily by Lovecraft's collaborators. Hastur appears in Chambers' King in Yellow and migrates into Lovecraft's mythology through August Derleth's systematization. Tsathoggua originates with Clark Ashton Smith and receives adoption into the broader mythos. These entities occupy ambiguous positions, significant within specific stories, but lacking the cosmic scale of the primary Great Old Ones. Dagon represents an interesting case. In Lovecraft's early story, Dagon, 1917, the entity is presented as immense and terrible, but not clearly cosmic in scope. Later references suggest Dagon might be either a Great Old One or a servitor species worshipped as god by degenerate human cults. This ambiguity typifies Lovecraft's approach. He provides fragments of information that readers assemble into tentative understanding, but the fragments never quite cohere into certainty. August Derleth's elemental system attempted to organize these entities by assigning them elemental correspondences: Cthulhu as water, Ithaqua as air, and so forth. He also introduced benevolent elder gods as cosmic opposition to the great old ones, creating a dualistic good versus evil framework. Lovecraft purists reject this imposition. Lovecraft's universe contains no benevolent cosmic forces, no ultimate justice, no reassuring categories. Derleth's systematization transforms cosmic horror into cosmic fantasy, giving readers hope that the elder gods might protect humanity. This hope contradicts everything Lovecraft's philosophy represents. Humans encounter the great old ones through three primary vectors: direct experience, cultist mediation, and scholarly investigation. Each vector produces madness, but the nature of that madness varies by approach. Direct experience is rarest and most devastating. In The Call of Cthulhu, the Norwegian sailors who encounter Cthulhu briefly suffer immediate psychological collapse. One dies of fright. The others live but carry permanent mental scars. The narrator, compiling their testimonies, feels his own sanity eroding from secondhand exposure. This pattern recurs throughout Lovecraft's work. Direct perception of great old ones shatters consciousness because human cognitive architecture cannot process what it perceives. This is not supernatural curse, but epistemological failure. Our brains evolved to parse environments at human scale, to recognize patterns relevant to survival and reproduction, to construct stable models of predictable reality. The great old ones violate every assumption those cognitive systems depend upon. Their geometry defies spatial processing. Their scale overwhelms magnitude estimation. Their temporality resists narrative comprehension. When forced to process this sensory data, consciousness breaks. Cultist mediation represents humanity's attempt to relate to these entities through familiar religious frameworks. Cults appear across Lovecraft's stories. The Louisiana swamp cultists in The Call of Cthulhu, the esoteric order of Dagon in The Shadow over Innsmouth, the Whately clan in The Dunwich Horror. These groups practice rituals, make sacrifices, await the return of their objects of worship. But consider the nature of this worship. Traditional religion assumes reciprocal relationship. Humans worship. Gods respond with blessing or punishment. The great old ones offer no such reciprocity. They do not answer prayers. They do not grant power proportional to devotion. Cultists worship entities that do not notice them, perform rituals whose efficacy remains ambiguous, and await transformations that will likely annihilate them, along with the rest of humanity. This positions the cults as cargo cults in the anthropological sense. During World War II, Pacific Islanders who witnessed military cargo drops sometimes constructed ritual imitations, building fake runways, performing mock radio operations, hoping to summon the cargo planes back. They mimicked observed behaviors without understanding the underlying systems. Lovecraft's cultists operate similarly. They perform rituals mentioned in fragmentary texts, reproduce invocations in languages they do not speak, and construct symbolic frameworks around entities whose true nature exceeds their comprehension. Why worship beings who do not care if you exist? This question reveals something crucial about human psychology. We are pattern-seeking creatures who impose narrative on randomness. When confronted with cosmic forces beyond comprehension, some humans respond by constructing religious frameworks that provide illusion of relationship. The cultists in Lovecraft's stories are not irrational. They are desperately rational, applying the only cognitive tools they possess, to experiences that transcend those tools' capacity. Scholarly investigation represents the third vector, and Lovecraft treats this with particular attention, given his own intellectual temperament. Academics and gentleman scholars dominate his protagonists: professors, antiquarians, folklorists. These characters approach the great old ones as problems to be researched, texts to be translated, mysteries to be solved. Their methodology is empirical, their commitment to truth absolute. This commitment destroys them. The Call of Cthulhu frames itself as scholarly compilation, a narrator assembling his uncle's research notes, synthesizing disparate testimonies into coherent account. The process of synthesis reveals pattern, the global cult activity, the psychic disturbances, the convergence on Cthulhu's emergence. Understanding the pattern does not save the narrator. It dooms him. By story's end, he knows too much to continue living normally and expects the cult to silence him for possessing dangerous knowledge. In At the Mountains of Madness, the Antarctic expedition discovers the city of the Elder Things and gradually reconstructs their history through sculptural evidence. The process is presented as scientific archaeology, methodical, documented, rational, yet the knowledge gained offers no comfort. Learning that humanity is a biological accident, that Earth has been colonized multiple times by incomprehensible species, that our reign is temporary interlude. This knowledge provides no advantage, no power, only horror. Lovecraft treats madness not as punishment, but as expanded perception. The characters who go mad are those who see clearly. Their breakdown is not cognitive failure, but cognitive success. They have processed information accurately and discovered that accurate processing of this particular information is incompatible with functional consciousness. The merciful ignorance Lovecraft references is not stupidity, but the blessed limitation that prevents most humans from perceiving cosmic reality clearly. This inverts traditional knowledge narratives. In most stories, knowledge empowers. The detective who solves the mystery, the scientist who discovers the cure, the scholar who translates the ancient text, they succeed through learning. Lovecraft's scholars succeed in learning and are destroyed by success. Knowledge of the great old ones is itself corrupting, not because it contains moral evil, but because it reveals truth incompatible with human psychological architecture. The concept of forbidden knowledge pervades Lovecraft's treatment of the great old ones, but it operates differently than in traditional religious or occult frameworks. This is not knowledge forbidden by divine decree or guarded by esoteric orders. This is knowledge that is fundamentally toxic to human consciousness. What do the great old ones reveal about reality's structure? First, that human existence is contingent and temporary. We did not originate through divine creation or occupy any privileged position. We are one biological configuration among countless others, arising from planetary conditions that will eventually change. The great old ones predate us by eons and will persist after our extinction. This temporal displacement renders human history, all of it, cosmically insignificant. Second, they reveal that our physical laws are local constraints, not universal truths. The non-Euclidean geometry of Relia, the dimensional permeability that allows Yog-Sothoth access, the dream reality ambiguity of Azathoth's creation. These suggest our physics describes only the narrow band of reality we can perceive. Vaster principles operate beyond our sensory range and cognitive capacity. We mistake our limitations for cosmic boundaries. Third, they demonstrate that consciousness is not the universe's ultimate expression, but an anomaly, possibly an error. Azathoth's mindlessness at the cosmic center suggests that awareness is local and temporary, that the fundamental state of reality is unconscious mechanism. This inverts every philosophical tradition that treats consciousness as sacred, special, or meaningful. We are not the universe becoming aware of itself. We are a brief flicker of awareness in an overwhelmingly unconscious cosmos. The merciful nature of human ignorance functions as recurring motif. Characters in Lovecraft's stories repeatedly express relief that most people will never know what they have learned. In The Call of Cthulhu, the narrator opens with famous lines, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. This mercy is not divine protection, but cognitive limitation. Our inability to perceive cosmic truth fully protects us from the psychological consequences of that perception. Why is knowledge of the great old ones corrupting? Not because it contains instructions for evil acts or moral transgressions. The corruption is epistemological. Once you understand that human frameworks, moral, physical, temporal, are local and contingent, those frameworks lose their binding power. You cannot unfeel the cosmic insignificance. You cannot restore the comfortable illusion that human concerns matter at universal scale. Mathematics and geometry function as gateways to this forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft frequently associates the great old ones with non-Euclidean space, with angles that should not exist, with architectural forms that violate physical possibility. This is not arbitrary association. Mathematics claims universal truth. 2 + 2 = 4, regardless of culture, belief, or perception. If mathematical principles we consider universal turn out to be local constraints, then our most reliable knowledge is revealed as provincial. The failure of scientific rationalism when confronted with the great old ones represents Lovecraft's most subversive philosophical move. Science promises that rigorous observation and rational analysis can explain any phenomenon. Lovecraft's protagonists apply scientific method to their investigations. They document, hypothesize, test. The method works, they discover truth. But the truth discovered invalidates the framework that discovered it. Scientific rationalism leads to revelation of its own inadequacy. Transgenerational corruption appears in stories like The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Dunwich Horror. Exposure to great old ones does not affect only the individual. It corrupts bloodlines. The Innsmouth townsfolk gradually transform into Deep One hybrids. The Whately family breeds with Yog-Sothoth, producing monstrous offspring. This biological contamination suggests that contact with these entities alters you at fundamental level, genetic, cellular, beyond individual consciousness, to affect descendants who never directly encountered the source. No redemption exists in Lovecraft's cosmology. Traditional horror often provides escape routes. The vampire can be staked, the demon exorcised, the curse broken. The great old ones offer no such resolution. If Cthulhu rises, humanity ends. If the barriers between dimensions collapse, our reality dissolves into chaos. No hero can prevent this permanently. No knowledge grants protection. The best outcome is delayed catastrophe, pushing cosmic dissolution further into future without eliminating the threat. This absence of redemptive possibility distinguishes cosmic horror from other horror traditions. Gothic horror provides potential salvation through virtue or faith. Supernatural horror allows for protective knowledge or ritual. Cosmic horror offers only the choice between ignorance and despair. You can remain unaware of cosmic reality and live comfortably in illusion, or you can pursue truth and discover that truth offers no comfort, no advantage, only the burden of knowing what you cannot change. The great old ones emerged gradually across Lovecraft's fiction, each appearance adding fragments to a mythology that never achieved, and was never meant to achieve, complete coherence. Tracing their earliest manifestations reveals deliberate pattern building disguised as organic discovery. Dagon, 1917, represents Lovecraft's first attempt at cosmic-scale horror. Written during his naval service anxiety, the story describes a morphine-addicted narrator recounting his encounter with a massive basalt monolith rising from the Pacific seafloor. Upon this monolith crawls an immense creature, Dagon, in the narrator's interpretation, linking it to ancient Philistine deity. The entity is never fully described. The narrator sees enough to comprehend its size and wrongness before fleeing. This story establishes the template. Oceanic depths conceal pre-human realities. Direct encounter produces madness, and the entity remains ambiguously divine or merely colossal. Nyarlathotep, 1920, introduces the first named entity who will become central to the developed mythology. Written after a vivid nightmare, the story describes an Egyptian figure demonstrating strange technologies across America. Audiences who witness his demonstrations go mad, and reality itself seems to fray in his presence. The prose is fevered, almost hallucinatory, lacking Lovecraft's later restraint. Yet Nyarlathotep's essential nature is already present. He is messenger, demonstrator, the chaos that walks among humanity rather than slumbering beneath oceans. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, crystallizes the methodology that defines cosmic horror. Lovecraft structures the story as posthumous manuscript, a narrator assembling his uncle's research after the professor's mysterious death. The narrative unfolds through 3 sections: discovery of a bas-relief sculpture, testimony of Police Inspector Legrasse regarding Louisiana cult activity, and the recovered manuscript of Norwegian sailor Johansen describing his crew's encounter with risen Rulia. This tripartite structure mimics academic synthesis. The narrator correlates disparate data, art, anthropology, maritime disaster, into pattern revealing global cult activity synchronized with Cthulhu's dream sendings. The story never presents Cthulhu's perspective. We receive only fragments, cultist chants in unknown language, sculptural approximations of his form, brief glimpse of his emergence before Rulia sinks again. The fragmentation is the point. Lovecraft understood that complete explanation diminishes horror. The story introduces the famous couplet, "That is not dead, which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die." This appears in the Necronomicon, here receiving its first substantial mention. The couplet suggests immortality through suspension rather than traditional eternal life. Death becomes temporary state, dormancy from which awakening remains possible. This reconfigures mortality itself as unstable category. The Dunwich Horror, 1928, presents Yog-Sothoth as procreative force and dimensional gateway. The Whately family, isolated in decaying Massachusetts farmland, conducts rituals from the Necronomicon to summon Yog-Sothoth. The result is twin offspring, Wilbur, semi-human and capable of passing in society, and his invisible brother, purely monstrous and confined to the expanding Whately farmhouse. Lovecraft provides more plot machinery in this story than in The Call of Cthulhu. There is conflict, pursuit, confrontation. Professor Armitage and his colleagues eventually destroy the invisible Whately twin, using counter-rituals from the very texts the family used for summoning. This resembles traditional narrative resolution. The monster is defeated, the threat contained. Yet the story undercuts this victory. The Whately twins were attempting to open permanent gateways for the Great Old One's return. Their failure is circumstantial, not systemic. The gateways remain possible. Other families in other isolated regions might succeed where the Whateleys failed. The invisible twin's death reveals its true form to witnesses. Lovecraft describes it through negation and comparison. It was partly squamous and partly rugose. Tentacles, eyes, mouth. But the general outline suggested something for which there is no name. This description through inadequacy becomes standard technique. The entity is described by listing features that approximate but never capture its essential wrongness. Clark Ashton Smith contributed Tsathoggua to the developing mythos. In Smith's Hyperborean stories, Tsathoggua is a toad-like entity, worshipped by prehistoric humans. Lovecraft adopted Tsathoggua into his own work, allowing cross-pollination between their fictional universes. This collaborative approach meant readers encountered consistent entity names across different authors' stories in the same magazines, reinforcing the impression of shared mythology rather than individual invention. Robert E. Howard's contributions centered less on new entities than on expanding the Necronomicon's apparent reach. Howard's protagonist, Bran Mac Morn, encounters references to the book in pre-Roman Britain, extending its chronological influence. The implicit suggestion that this forbidden text has circulated across centuries and continents, corrupting readers in each era, adds archaeological depth to Lovecraft's invention. August Derleth's relationship with the mythos proved more complicated. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, Derleth positioned himself as literary executor and continuation writer. He completed several of Lovecraft's fragmentary drafts and wrote new stories set in the mythos. His most significant and most controversial contribution was systematizing the cosmic entities into opposing factions. Malevolent Great Old Ones versus benevolent Elder Gods, each associated with classical elements. This systematization contradicts Lovecraft's philosophical core. Lovecraft's universe contains no benevolent cosmic forces, no ultimate justice. Derleth imposed dualistic framework that transforms cosmic horror into cosmic fantasy. The Great Old Ones become defeatable villains rather than inevitable forces. Most contemporary Lovecraft scholars reject Derleth's additions, treating them as well-intentioned but fundamentally misguided interpretation. The intertextual connections create cumulative weight. When the Dunwich Horror references the Necronomicon that appeared in The Call of Cthulhu, when multiple stories mention Arkham, Massachusetts, when different narrators consult the same forbidden texts, the shared universe achieves textual solidity. Readers begin tracking these connections, mapping the mythology, creating concordances. Lovecraft never provided such concordance himself. He left that work to readers, understanding that active reader participation in constructing the mythology increases its psychological impact. The Call of Cthulhu deserves extended analysis as the foundational text for understanding how Lovecraft embedded cosmic dread into narrative structure. Published in Weird Tales in February 1928, the story establishes the template that defines literary cosmic horror. The opening paragraph contains Lovecraft's most quoted passage. "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. This statement is not atmospheric preamble, but philosophical thesis. The narrator, Francis Wayland Thurston, declares that human ignorance protects us from unbearable knowledge. The story that follows demonstrates this thesis through his own correlation of previously disconnected information. The narrative employs nested structure. Thurston assembles his uncle George Gamble Angel's papers after the professor's death in 1926. These papers contain 3 distinct investigations that Thurston synthesizes into coherent pattern. This structure mimics academic research, collecting sources, identifying connections, constructing interpretative framework. The methodology is rational. The conclusion is madness-inducing. The first section, The Horror in Clay, describes sculptor Henry Anthony Wilcox's arrival at Professor Angel's office in March 1925. Wilcox brings a bas-relief depicting a monstrous creature and reports suffering intense dreams of cyclopean cities and strange chanting. Angel, a professor emeritus of Semitic languages, recognizes the chanted phrase from previous research, but does not immediately reveal this to Wilcox. Tsathoggua sculpture shows a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. This description walks careful line. It provides enough detail for visualization. Octopoid head, wings, claws, while maintaining wrongness through qualifiers like vaguely anthropoid and rubbery-looking. The sculpture approximates something Wilcox saw in dreams, which means the physical object is translation of vision, already twice removed from hypothetical reality. Lovecraft never claims this description captures Cthulhu accurately. It represents human attempt to render the unrenderable. Wilcox's dreams coincide precisely with March 1st to April 2nd, 1925. During this period, sensitive individuals worldwide experience similar visions. The story presents this as fact requiring explanation rather than coincidence to dismiss. Angel documents the synchronicity, but dies before publishing findings. His death is attributed to heart failure after collision with a sailor near Providence waterfront. Thurston suspects murder, but cannot prove it. The second section, The Tale of Inspector Legrasse, contains Angel's earlier research. In 1908, New Orleans Police Inspector John Raymond Legrasse raided a swamp ritual involving a very low, mixed-blooded, and mentally aberrant type of worshippers. These cultists danced around a monolith-like idol while chanting Fenglui Mglubnaf, Cthulhu Rilier, Wagahnagul Ftagan. Legrasse sought expert interpretation of the idol and chant at the 1908 American Archaeological Society meeting in St. Louis. Professor Webb of Princeton recognizes similar iconography from his Greenland expedition of 1860, where Eskimo cultists worshipped nearly identical idols and recited similar chants. Webb's informant translated the phrase as, "In his house at Relaye, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming." This provides linguistic key. The chant is invocation in Ardliahian language. The idol represents Cthulhu, and the cult's mythology involves his eventual awakening. The cultist's theology, as Legrasse reports it, holds that the great old ones came from the stars when Earth was young, building cities and enslaving early life forms. They warred with other entities and eventually became imprisoned when the stars shifted into wrong configurations. Cthulhu lies dormant in R'lyeh, somewhere in the Pacific. When the stars become right again, the secret priests would take great Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule of Earth. This mythology provides framework without explanation. Why did the great old ones come to Earth? What was their purpose? Why do stars' configurations matter? The text refuses to answer. The cultists themselves likely don't know. They preserve ritual and belief without understanding the cosmic mechanics involved. This positions them as cargo cultists, as previously discussed, performing inherited ceremonies in hope of results they cannot predict or control. The third section, The Madness from the Sea, introduces Gustav Johansson's manuscript, recovered by Thurston through Norwegian contacts after reading newspaper accounts of a mysterious maritime incident in April 1925. Johansson commanded the schooner Emma, which encountered a strange yacht crewed by a queer and evil-looking crew of Kanakas and half-castes near 47 degrees 9 minutes south, 126 degrees 43 minutes west. After violent confrontation, Johansson and his men sailed the captured yacht to an uncharted island that had suddenly risen from the ocean. The island is R'lyeh. Lovecraft's description emphasizes geometric wrongness. There had been an age-old stone door, a gate, and when Johansson tried to open it, it had swung upwards instead of outwards, or sideways, or in any normal direction. The architecture defies Euclidean geometry. Angles appear simultaneously obtuse and acute. Proportions create visual distortion and physical nausea. The non-Euclidean nature is not decorative detail, but fundamental wrongness, suggesting the space exists according to mathematical principles our perceptual systems cannot properly process. From R'lyeh's opening gates emerges Cthulhu. Johansson's description is brief and traumatized. A mountain walked or stumbled. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. When description is provided, it matches the bas-relief sculpture, but at impossible scale. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. The surviving crew attempts escape. Cthulhu pursues. In desperation, Johansson rams the Emma through Cthulhu's head. The entity's body bursts, reforms, and continues pursuit. Only when R'lyeh begins sinking again does Cthulhu abandon chase and return to his city. Johansson escapes and eventually dies of fever. His manuscript survives as final testimony. Thurston's synthesis reveals pattern. The March-April 1925 dreams coincided with R'lyeh's temporary surfacing, triggered by seismic activity. Cthulhu's brief emergence produced psychic disturbances in sensitive individuals worldwide. His return to dormancy ended the visions. This explains synchronicity between Wilcox's dreams, the cultist activity Legras investigated, and the maritime disaster Johansson survived. All connect to Cthulhu's momentary awakening. The story's conclusion is not resolution, but escalating dread. Thurston now knows too much. He expects the cult to eliminate him as they presumably eliminated his uncle. He writes the manuscript as record, knowing it may be suppressed. The final paragraph states, "I know too much and the cult still lives." The knowledge gained provides no power, no protection, only vulnerability. What makes the Call of Cthulhu effective is its refusal to present Cthulhu as defeatable threat. The sailors did not stop him through courage or weaponry. R'lyeh sank again because geological conditions shifted, not because human resistance succeeded. Cthulhu was not destroyed when the ship pierced his head. he reformed immediately. The only reason humanity survived this particular awakening was timing. The stars were not fully right yet. This positions the story as preview of inevitable catastrophe rather than contained horror incident. Cthulhu will wake fully when conditions permit. Humanity has no defense. The most we can hope for is ignorance of the timeline. Thurston's correlation of information makes him aware but helpless. This is cosmic horror's essential gesture: knowledge without power, awareness without agency. The Dunwich Horror represents Lovecraft's most conventionally plotted Great Old One story, featuring clear antagonists, heroic opposition, and apparent victory. Yet even within this more structured narrative, cosmic horror's essential implications remain intact. Published in Weird Tales in April, 1929, the story demonstrates how Lovecraft could work within genre conventions while maintaining philosophical core. The story opens with atmospheric description of Dunwich, Massachusetts, an isolated, decaying region where the natives are repellent. Their ancestors were more than suspect. This establishes hereditary taint theme that runs throughout. Dunwich is not merely backward. It harbors bloodlines corrupted by contact with forces beyond human categorization. The Whately family represents this corruption's purest expression. Old Whately, the family patriarch, conducts obscure rituals in a hillside farmhouse. His albino daughter Lavinia bears twin sons in 1913 after no visible pregnancy and no acknowledged father. One twin, Wilbur, develops with disturbing rapidity. By age 4, he appears 13. By 13, he resembles a mature adult and studies his grandfather's occult library voraciously. The other twin remains invisible to human eyes, confined to the progressively expanded farmhouse. Lovecraft presents Wilbur's development through community observation. Local gossip notes his precocious growth, his grandfather's strange purchases of cattle that disappear without slaughter or sale, the sounds emanating from the sealed farmhouse. This narrative technique, cosmic horror filtered through rural rumor, grounds the fantastic in social realism. The Dunwich locals suspect something wrong, but lack frameworks to articulate what they witness. Old Whately dies in 1924, leaving cryptic warnings about his grandson's unfinished work. Wilbur continues his studies, seeking access to the Latin Necronomicon, held at Miskatonic University's restricted collection. Here Lovecraft introduces Dr. Henry Armitage, university librarian and story's primary heroic figure. Armitage denies Wilbur access, disturbed by the young man's intensity and the nature of his research. Wilbur attempts nighttime theft of the book and is killed by the library's guard, Dog. Wilbur's death reveals his true nature. His body, partially human above the waist, is monstrous below. The trunk and lower parts of the body were teratologically fabulous, so that only generous clothing could ever have enabled it to pass among men unchallenged or uneradicated. Tentacles, rudimentary mouths, alien organs. Wilbur is hybrid, his human appearance masking partial Great Old One biology. His death prompts Armitage to investigate the Whately farmhouse and decipher Old Whately's ritual diary. The diary reveals Yog-Sothoth as the twins' father. Old Whately summoned Yog-Sothoth through rituals derived from the Necronomicon, offering Lavinia as vessel. The result was twin offspring representing different aspects of their father's nature. Wilbur, partly human, could navigate human society to gather knowledge for the eventual plan. The invisible twin, purely monstrous, waited in the farmhouse for liberation. After Wilbur's death, the invisible twin escapes. The story's Middle section describes its rampage across Dunwich. Lovecraft never directly shows the creature, only its effects. Destroyed buildings, devoured livestock, massive tracks suggesting impossible bulk. Witnesses describe it through negation, bigger in a barn, all made of squirming ropes, covered with eyes, capturing fragments their minds can process while rejecting comprehensive perception. Armitage, accompanied by colleagues Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan, confronts the entity on Sentinel Hill. Using counter-formulas from the Necronomicon and powder from Ibn Ghazi's ancient alchemical text, they perform banishment ritual. The creature becomes briefly visible before vanishing. Lovecraft provides description through the academic witness's collective observation. It was a round, viscous mass, covered with eyes, tentacles, no definable head or limbs. But in its wake, the horror left a track of charred and blasted vegetation, and on the rocks were sticky, evil-smelling pools. The thing was so huge that the top nearly reached the sky, and the eyes were far enough apart to be upon different faces of it, and the span of its tentacles must have covered acres. The description overwhelms. Lovecraft piles details: eyes, tentacles, viscous texture, until cumulative effect transcends individual elements. The creature is defeated by ritual, not because it is weak, but because Armitage deployed the correct counterforces at the precise moment before the creature could complete its purpose. That purpose, revealed through the diary and Wilbur's research, was opening permanent gateways for the Great Old One's return. The Whately twins planned to let him out on a specific date when stellar configurations favored dimensional permeability. With both twins dead, this particular attempt fails. Dunwich is saved. Humanity is spared. Yet the story's resolution contains embedded ambiguity. Armitage succeeded because he possessed the necessary texts, understood the languages, and acted at the precise moment. This was not inevitable. If Wilbur had obtained the Miskatonic Necronomicon and completed his research before dying, if Armitage had been less diligent or knowledgeable, the Whately plan might have succeeded. The victory is circumstantial, not systemic. More disturbing is the implication that this was one attempt among potentially many. The Whately family is not unique. Throughout Lovecraft's fiction, isolated families in decaying regions conduct similar experiments. The marshes of Innsmouth breed with deep ones. Ephraim Waite of The Thing on the Doorstep studies body transference rituals. Nothing prevents other families in other locations from succeeding where the Whateleys failed. The story also introduces Yog-Sothoth, with more theological clarity than other Great Old Ones receive. Old Whately's diary contains the famous passage, Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. This description positions Yog-Sothoth as literally coterminous with all time and space, omnipresent without being omnipotent in traditional sense. Yog-Sothoth's omnipresence makes the entity perpetually accessible. Unlike Cthulhu, who requires specific stellar configurations to wake, Yog-Sothoth is always available to those who know the correct invocations. This accessibility paradoxically increases horror. Cthulhu's dormancy provides temporal buffer. Yog-Sothoth requires no awakening because he never sleeps. He exists adjacent to every moment, waiting for dimensional barriers to thin enough for manifestation. The Dunwich Horror contains Lovecraft's most explicit engagement with rural degeneration anxiety. The story describes Dunwich families as repellent and decayed, their bloodlines contaminated by isolation and inbreeding. This biological horror intersects with cosmic horror through the Whately hybrid breeding. The suggestion is that certain human lineages retain or develop susceptibility to Great Old One contact, whether through ancient worship traditions, geographic proximity to weak dimensional barriers, or deliberate cultivation of the contamination. Contemporary readers must grapple with these elements' disturbing implications. Lovecraft's equation of rural poverty, ethnic difference, and cosmic contamination reflects his era's prejudices and his personal anxieties. The story traffics in eugenics-adjacent rhetoric, healthy society versus degenerate bloodlines. This cannot be separated from the text or excused as merely historical artifact. It is embedded in the story's structure. Yet the cosmic horror elements transcend, without erasing, these problematic foundations. The revelation that humanity faces potential annihilation from forces that regard us as insignificant operates independent of which specific humans Lovecraft chose as victims or vessels. Later writers have retained the cosmic framework while jettisoning the biological determinism, demonstrating that the philosophy of cosmic indifference need not depend on racist pseudoscience. The Great Old One's mythology extended far beyond Lovecraft's direct authorship through collaboration, continuation, and appropriation. This expansion transformed his personal vision into shared cultural property, with consequences both illuminating and delusive. August Derleth's contributions began during Lovecraft's lifetime through correspondence and continued for decades after his death. Derleth founded Arkham House in 1939 specifically to preserve Lovecraft's work, publishing collections that rescued stories from pulp magazine obscurity. This editorial work was invaluable. Without Derleth, much of Lovecraft's fiction might have vanished. However, Derleth's creative additions proved controversial. He completed fragments from Lovecraft's notes, writing stories like The Lurker at the Threshold and The Survivor, based on minimal source material. More significantly, he systematized the mythology into dualistic framework entirely foreign to Lovecraft's philosophy. Derleth introduced the Elder Gods, benevolent cosmic beings opposed to the Great Old Ones, and organized entities into elemental categories. This elemental scheme assigned each Great Old One to fire, water, earth, or air. Cthulhu represented water, Ithaqua embodied air, and so forth. Derleth also positioned the conflict as cosmic war between good and evil forces. Humanity could appeal to elder gods for protection against Great Old Ones. This fundamentally transforms cosmic horror into cosmic fantasy. Lovecraft's indifferent universe becomes battleground where benevolent powers might intervene on humanity's behalf. Lovecraft scholars, particularly S.T. Joshi, have thoroughly documented why this systematization contradicts Lovecraft's core philosophy. Lovecraft explicitly rejected dualism, moral categories applied to cosmic forces, and the notion that any entities regard humanity as worth protecting. Derleth's additions impose precisely the comforting frameworks Lovecraft designed his mythology to demolish. Most contemporary writers working in the mythos reject Derleth's cosmology while acknowledging his crucial preservation work. Ramsey Campbell represents a different mode of expansion. Campbell began writing Lovecraftian fiction as teenager in the 1960s, initially setting stories in Lovecraft's New England. Lovecraft himself, through correspondence shortly before his death, encouraged Campbell to develop British settings instead. Campbell's mature work relocated cosmic horror to England's industrial Midlands, creating the fictional Severn Valley and city of Brichester. Campbell's contribution was recognizing that cosmic horror's principles could operate independent of Lovecraft's specific mythology. Rather than adding new great old ones to existing pantheon, Campbell developed parallel entities, Glaaki, Ihort, Yigalanak, that embodied similar philosophical implications without requiring connection to Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth. This demonstrated the mythology's exportability while avoiding the canonicity debates that plague direct continuations. Brian Lumley's Titus Crow series, beginning in the 1970s, took opposite approach. Lumley explicitly adopted Derleth's dualistic framework, creating ongoing narrative of human hero Titus Crow fighting the Great Old Ones with Elder God assistance. These novels function as cosmic horror adventure fiction, pulp action stories using Lovecraftian entities as villains. Lumley's work found commercial success, but limited critical respect from Lovecraft purists who viewed it as fundamental misunderstanding of cosmic horror's philosophical core. The role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, designed by Sandy Peterson and published by Chaosium in 1981, profoundly influenced how subsequent generations encountered the mythology. The game required codifying rules for Great Old One encounters, sanity mechanics, and spell effects. This systematization paralleled Derleth's, but served functional purpose. Games require consistent rules. The sanity system proved particularly influential. Characters who encounter cosmic horrors lose sanity points, eventually going permanently insane if exposure continues. This gamified Lovecraft's conception of madness through knowledge, making psychological breakdown mechanically inevitable. The game also necessitated creating stats for entities Lovecraft deliberately left vague. When Cthulhu receives hit points and armor ratings, unknowability suffers. Yet the game introduced millions to the mythology who might never have read the source stories. Caitlin R. Kiernan's fiction represents contemporary literary engagement with Lovecraftian themes. Kiernan's work, particularly novels like The Drowning Girl and The Red Tree, employs unreliable narrators investigating cosmic horror while grappling with mental illness. This approach questions whether cosmic revelation causes madness, or whether madness produces cosmic visions. The ambiguity returns philosophical complexity that pulp imitations often lack. Laird Barron's stories modernize cosmic horror through noir aesthetics and contemporary settings. His Great Old Ones analogs appear in stories like the Imago sequence and the Croning, but they emerge from corporate conspiracies, scientific research gone wrong, and criminal underworlds rather than isolated New England villages. Barron demonstrates cosmic horror's compatibility with 21st century paranoia while maintaining Lovecraft's essential vision of human insignificance. The internet age has produced explosion of Lovecraftian fiction through collaborative wikis and Creative Commons projects. The SCP Foundation, beginning in 2008, created shared universe of anomalous entities requiring containment. While not explicitly Lovecraftian, SCP draws heavily on cosmic horrors, bureaucratization of the impossible aesthetic. Entities are numbered, their properties documented, their containment procedures specified. This treats cosmic horror as administrative problem, which either satirizes or reinforces the original horror, depending on reader interpretation. The tension between preservation and dilution remains unresolved. Every expansion of the mythology makes it more accessible, but potentially less philosophically coherent. When Cthulhu appears as plush toy, when Great Old Ones become video game bosses with health bars, when cosmic horror gets domesticated into fandom, does the original philosophy survive? Or does familiarity inevitably defang what was designed to terrify through incomprehensibility? This question has no definitive answer. The mythology's spread ensures Lovecraft's ideas reach audiences far beyond literary horror readers. Simultaneously, that spread transforms cosmic indifference into franchise, unknowability into canon to be mastered. Both processes continue, making the great old ones simultaneously more culturally prominent and further from their philosophical origins than at any point in their existence. The boundary between Lovecraft's fiction and perceived reality began eroding almost immediately after his stories entered circulation. The Necronomicon, invented as narrative device, became the subject of genuine belief, requested at libraries and bookstores by people convinced of its existence. This category confusion, fiction accepted as suppressed fact, reveals something profound about how cosmic horror operates in cultural consciousness. The Necronomicon hoax deserves primary attention. Lovecraft created the grimoire in 1921, providing elaborate fictional provenance. Authored by Abdul al-Hazred in Damascus circa 730 CE, translated into Greek as Necronomicon by Theodorus Philetus in 950 CE, then into Latin by Olaus Wormius in 1228. He specified that only 5 copies of the Latin edition survived into modern times, held at institutions including Miskatonic University, the British Museum, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. This detailed bibliography convinced readers. By the 1930s, libraries reported requests for the Necronomicon. The requests continued for decades. In the 1960s and 1970s, as occultism experienced cultural revival, the frequency increased. People wanted to read the book Lovecraft's characters consulted, apparently unable or unwilling to recognize it as fictional construct. The phenomenon intensified in 1973 when George Hay's edition of the Necronomicon appeared, claiming to be translation of John Dee's manuscript. Hay, a British science fiction editor, collaborated with occultist Robert Turner to produce a text that read like genuine grimoire while acknowledging Lovecraft's influence. This edition occupied ambiguous territory, presented as real historical text, while simultaneously admitting its modern creation. The Simon Necronomicon appeared in 1977, published by Schlangekraft Inc., and claiming to be translation of ancient Sumerian grimoire, discovered by anonymous monk in the 1960s. This edition was straightforward fabrication, merging Lovecraftian names with actual Mesopotamian mythology. Enlil and Marduk appear alongside Cthulhu and Azathoth, creating syncretism that satisfied neither serious occultists nor Lovecraft scholars. Yet it sold hundreds of thousands of copies and remains in print, purchased by people seeking either fictional curiosity or genuine magical practice. Why did the Necronomicon hoax succeed so thoroughly? Several factors converge. First, Lovecraft's bibliography technique created textual authority. When multiple stories reference the same book across different contexts, readers perceive consistent reality. Second, the forbidden knowledge narrative appeals to desire for secret truth. Mainstream culture dismisses certain ideas. Perhaps those ideas survive in suppressed texts. Third, the absence of the actual book creates vacuum that fabrications can fill. If the Necronomicon existed and were widely available, the mystery would evaporate. The phenomenon extends beyond the Necronomicon. Occult bookstores report requests for De Vermis Mysteries, Unaussprechlichen Kulten, and other fictional grimoires. Some retailers indulge the confusion, placing Lovecraft's fiction in occult sections rather than fantasy. This categorization shift transforms the stories from entertainment into esoteric knowledge, regardless of authorial intent. Internet-age urban legends have adapted Great Old One's mythology into contemporary conspiracy frameworks. Antarctica, already site of At the Mountains of Madness, became nexus for conspiracy theories after satellite imagery revealed vast lake beneath Antarctic ice in the 1990s. Conspiracy theorists immediately connected this to Lovecraft's story, suggesting the Elder Thing city might actually exist. The fact that At the Mountains of Madness was published in 1936, decades before Antarctic ice penetration became technologically possible, did not deter believers. The story became prophecy rather than fiction. Cthulhu sightings populate paranormal forums and creepypasta repositories. These typically follow pattern: witness experiences, vivid dream of underwater city, wakes to find strange marks or objects, researches the imagery, and discovers Lovecraft's descriptions match the vision. The narrative implies Lovecraft documented real entities rather than invented them. This inverts the relationship between creator and creation, positioning the author as channeler or recorder rather than originator. The Philip K. Dick connection deserves mention. Dick, science fiction author prone to mystical experiences and paranoid episodes, became convinced during the 1970s that Lovecraft had accessed genuine cosmic knowledge. Dick's Valis trilogy explores the possibility that reality is controlled by vast artificial intelligence system, a notion bearing structural similarity to Lovecraft's mechanistic cosmos. Dick's mental state during this period was unstable, but his appropriation of Lovecraftian themes into personal theology demonstrates how the mythology can colonize belief systems vulnerable to cosmic paranoia. UFO and cryptid cultures have adopted Great Old One imagery, particularly Cthulhu. Reports of underwater anomalies or unidentified submerged objects sometimes reference Arlaya. The logic is conspiratorial. If governments suppress UFO evidence, they might also suppress evidence of non-human entities predating humanity. Lovecraft's fiction provides vocabulary for experiences that resist conventional explanation, whether those experiences are genuine perception, misidentification, or delusion becomes secondary to the framework's explanatory utility. The ancient aliens genre, popularized by television series and speculative archaeology, domesticates Lovecraft's cosmic horror into pseudo-scientific narrative. Shows like Ancient Aliens suggest extraterrestrial visitors influenced human development, building monuments and founding religions. This appropriates Great Old One's temporal priority. They predated humanity, while removing cosmic indifference. Ancient aliens supposedly cared about human development, engineered our evolution, left beneficial knowledge. This is Lovecraft filtered through hopeful misreading, cosmic horror converted into cosmic assistance. Academic hoaxes involving Lovecraftian materials occasionally surface. In 2004, the Miskatonic University Press published The Starry Wisdom, a tribute to H.P. Lovecraft, which included fabricated scholarly apparatus, suggesting the publisher was actual Miskatonic University. The joke was transparent to informed readers, but potentially confusing to casual audiences. These hoaxes blur fiction/reality boundaries deliberately, participating in the Necronomicon tradition of productive confusion. What makes these hoaxes and beliefs significant is their revelation of desire. People want the Great Old Ones to be real, or at least want the possibility left open. This desire seems paradoxical. Why wish for entities whose existence would render human concerns cosmically meaningless? Perhaps because cosmic meaninglessness offers escape from responsibility. If Azathoth dreams reality into being, if Cthulhu's awakening will end human civilization regardless of our choices, then personal failure and collective catastrophe become inevitable rather than preventable. This is fatalism disguised as cosmology, despair given cosmic justification. The great old ones have proven remarkably resistant to successful visual adaptation while flourishing in other media. This resistance reveals something essential about cosmic horror's mechanism. It depends on suggestion, ambiguity, and the imagination's capacity to generate terror exceeding what explicit representation can achieve. Film has consistently failed to capture Lovecraft effectively at commercial scale. Hollywood adaptations either deviate so dramatically from source material that connection becomes nominal, or they attempt fidelity and produce underwhelming results. The Haunted Palace, 1963. Nominally based on Lovecraft's The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, was marketed as Edgar Allan Poe adaptation because Poe sold better. Reanimator, 1985, succeeds as horror comedy but abandons cosmic horror entirely, treating Herbert West as mad scientist rather than cosmic transgressor. The fundamental problem is that Lovecraft's entities lose power when visualized. Cthulhu described in text, a pulpy tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body, allows readers to construct personal nightmare. Cthulhu shown on screen becomes specific, bounded, and therefore diminished. CGI and practical effects must choose definite form, eliminating the productive ambiguity that makes written descriptions effective. The Call of Cthulhu, 2005, produced by the H.P. Lovecraft. Historical society addressed this problem through limitation rather than expansion. The film was shot in black and white silent film style, mimicking 1920s cinema. This aesthetic choice transformed limitation into advantage. The lack of sound and color, the exaggerated performance style, and the practical effects' obvious artificiality prevented the film from claiming definitive visualization. Viewers understood they were watching interpretation rather than authoritative representation. This humility preserved the source material's ambiguity. Guillermo del Toro's Unmade at the Mountains of Madness represents the most famous failed adaptation. Del Toro spent years developing the project with major studio backing and significant budget. The film collapsed in pre-production when studios demanded PG-13 rating and expressed concern about similarity to Prometheus, 2012. Del Toro's approach would have emphasized body horror and exploratory dread, potentially capturing Lovecraft's atmosphere. That we will never see it demonstrates Hollywood's inability to justify cosmic horror's commercial viability. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, succeeds as Lovecraftian film without adapting specific story. The film follows insurance investigator tracking missing horror novelist whose fiction appears to alter reality. As the investigator pursues the author, the boundary between fictional and actual events dissolves. The film embodies cosmic horror's essential gesture, reality revealed as unstable, human agency as illusion, without requiring Cthulhu or other specific entities. This suggests successful Lovecraftian cinema might require abandoning direct adaptation for thematic interpretation. The Void, 2016, demonstrates how practical effects can capture wrongness when deployed with restraint. The Canadian independent film features cultists attempting to birth cosmic entity through ritualistic body horror. The creature effects are tangible, messy, and deliberately incomplete. Tentacles emerging from wounds, geometries that hurt to perceive, transformations that resist coherent visualization. By keeping entities partially obscured and emphasizing visceral texture over clear form, the film maintains unease that polished CGI often eliminates. Gaming has proven far more hospitable to Great Old One's adaptation. Interactive media's inherent qualities, player agency, environmental exploration, mechanical systems, align with cosmic horror in productive ways. The Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, published by Chaosium in 1981, remains the most influential adaptation across any medium. The game's sanity system mechanizes Lovecraft's conception of madness through knowledge. Characters who encounter cosmic entities or forbidden knowledge lose sanity points. Continued exposure produces phobias, manias, and eventually permanent insanity. This transforms psychological horror into game mechanics, making mental breakdown statistically inevitable for investigators who persist. The game also inverts traditional RPG progression. In Dungeons & Dragons, characters grow stronger through experience. In Call of Cthulhu, investigators grow more damaged. Every successful investigation leaves scars. The optimal strategy, avoid cosmic knowledge entirely, contradicts the game's premise. Players must accept that their characters will likely die or go insane, that success means learning horrible truth rather than defeating enemies. This mechanical framework captures Lovecraft's philosophy more effectively than most literary adaptations. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, 2002, for Nintendo GameCube, implemented sanity mechanics that broke the fourth wall. As player characters witnessed cosmic horror, the game itself began malfunctioning, volume adjusting spontaneously, screen displaying fake errors, save files appearing to delete. These effects targeted players rather than characters, creating genuine uncertainty about whether the game was broken or deliberately undermining player confidence. This meta-horror approach recognized that cosmic horror aims to disturb audiences, not just fictional characters. Bloodborne, 2015, represents the most sophisticated interactive engagement with Lovecraftian themes. The game begins as Victorian Gothic horror, hunters tracking beasts in plague-ridden city, before revealing cosmic horror underneath. The beasts are humans transforming through exposure to blood of the old gods. The Great Ones, Bloodborne's equivalent to Lovecraft's entities, exist in higher dimensions, their presence causing madness and mutation. The player character eventually transcends humanity to perceive these entities directly, at which point the game's environment and enemies shift to reflect cosmic reality that was always present but imperceptible. Bloodborne's genius lies in environmental storytelling. Players gradually discover the world's cosmology through item descriptions, architectural details, and enemy placements rather than exposition. This mimics Lovecraft's methodology, fragmentary knowledge assembled into terrible pattern. The game never fully explains its mythology, maintaining productive ambiguity while providing enough coherence for players to construct interpretations. Amnesia: The Dark Descent, 2010, and its sequel, A Machine for Pigs, 2013, use first-person perspective and deliberate player disempowerment to generate dread. Players cannot fight enemies. They can only hide or flee. This mechanical weakness mirrors cosmic horror's philosophical weakness. Humans cannot oppose cosmic forces, only briefly evade them. The game's sanity systems punish players for looking directly at monsters, literalizing Lovecraft's theme that perceiving cosmic reality damages consciousness. Musical interpretations of the Great Old Ones span genres from metal to experimental ambient. Metallica's instrumental The Call of Cthulhu, 1984, translates cosmic horror into progressive metal structure, shifting time signatures, building tension without release, musical complexity suggesting incomprehensibility. The instrumental nature is significant. Without lyrics, the music must evoke horror through structure and atmosphere alone. Black metal's atmospheric tendency toward cosmic themes has produced extensive Lovecraftian work. Bands like Darkspace and Al-Rakis explore cosmic indifference through repetitive, droning compositions that suggest vast, empty spaces. The music's hostility to conventional beauty, its embrace of dissonance and harsh production, aligns with cosmic horror's rejection of comforting aesthetics. Cryochamber, dark ambient label, has released multiple albums directly inspired by Lovecraft. These compositions use deep drones, environmental recordings, and subtle melodic fragments to create soundscapes suggesting underwater cities or Antarctic wastelands. The music functions as atmospheric background, creating unease through suggestion rather than demanding focused attention. This mirrors how the Great Old Ones operate in Lovecraft's fiction, present at the edges, influencing atmosphere without requiring center stage. The H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society's musical comedies, A Shoggoth on the Roof, A Very Scary Solstice, demonstrate how deeply the mythology has penetrated popular consciousness. These productions parody musical theater conventions while demonstrating affectionate knowledge of source material. The fact that such parodies work requires audiences familiar enough with Lovecraft to recognize references while finding humor in their incongruous presentation. This suggests the Great Old Ones have achieved cultural saturation where comedy and horror can coexist. The Great Old Ones have migrated from pulp fiction into academic discourse, subcultural identity markers, and political satire. This migration demonstrates how cosmic horror's themes resonate beyond horror genre, addressing contemporary anxieties about knowledge, power, and human significance. Academic Lovecraft studies emerged seriously in the 1980s, spearheaded by S.T. Joshi's biographical and critical work. Joshi's H.P. Lovecraft, A Life, 1996, established comprehensive biographical framework, while his critical studies positioned Lovecraft as significant American author rather than mere genre writer. This academic legitimation opened space for theoretical approaches. Post-colonial criticism has engaged Lovecraft's racism while examining how his cosmic horror framework might be separated from its prejudiced applications. Critics note that Lovecraft's anxiety about miscegenation, degeneration, and ethnic contamination drive stories like The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Horror at Red Hook. The cosmic horror in these stories is inseparable from racist dread, fear that racial mixing will destroy pure bloodlines. Contemporary theorists argue that cosmic horror's philosophical core, human insignificance before vast forces, need not depend on racist frameworks. China Miéville, Marxist theorist and weird fiction author, has written extensively on how Lovecraft's tentacular horror can represent capitalism's incomprehensible mechanisms rather than ethnic others. The indifferent cosmos becomes indifferent market. The Great Old Ones become global capital, vast, ancient, operating according to principles that destroy human meaning while remaining technically non-malicious. Queer theory has found productive terrain in Lovecraft's body horror. The transformations in The Shadow over Innsmouth, human bodies gradually revealing their true monstrous nature, can be read as transition narrative, though one Lovecraft intended as horrific. The idea that your body might not match your true nature, that transformation is inevitable and irreversible, carries resonance for transgender experience when divorced from Lovecraft's horror framing. Some queer theorists reclaim this imagery, finding affirmation in becoming other that Lovecraft meant as nightmare. The New Weird literary movement crystallized in the early 2000s through authors like China Miéville, Jeff Vandermeer, and K.J. Bishop, explicitly draws on Lovecraftian themes while updating them for contemporary concerns. New Weird fiction maintains cosmic horror's essential gesture. Reality is stranger and more terrible than human frameworks can accommodate, but rejects Lovecraft's conservative politics and expands beyond his New England settings. Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy exemplifies this approach. Annihilation, 2014, follows scientific expedition into Area X, a coastal region where nature has become alien and rules of biology no longer apply. The transformation is beautiful and terrible simultaneously, creating ecological horror that Lovecraft rarely explored. Where Lovecraft's entities threaten to destroy Earth, Vandermeer's Area X transforms it into something incomprehensible but not necessarily worse, just radically other. True Detective's first season, 2014, brought Lovecraftian themes to prestige television. The Louisiana setting, references to Carcosa and the Yellow King, borrowed from Chambers, and the revelation of cosmic horror underneath mundane crime narrative introduced mainstream audiences to cosmic horror aesthetics. The show's critical and commercial success demonstrated appetite for serious engagement with these themes outside genre niches. Internet culture has transformed the great old ones into memes while simultaneously maintaining genuine engagement. Cthulhu for President campaigns began in the 1990s and proliferated online. The joke, Cthulhu is honest about cosmic indifference, while human politicians pretend to care, satirizes democratic politics through cosmic horror. Campaign slogans like "Why vote for the lesser evil" and "No lives matter" weaponize Lovecraft's philosophy against political hypocrisy. This satirical appropriation cuts multiple directions. It can represent genuine political nihilism. All politicians are corrupt. All systems are broken. Cosmic indifference is honest assessment of political reality. It can represent cynical detachment masquerading as sophistication. It can represent playful engagement with horror themes without genuine philosophical commitment. The ambiguity is productive. The meme format allows simultaneous irony and sincerity. Plush Cthulhus, Funko Pop figures, and other commodified Great Old Ones merchandise represent opposite pole of subcultural appropriation. Cosmic horror becomes cute. The unthinkable becomes collectible. This defangs the original horror entirely. Azathoth as desk toy cannot represent nuclear chaos at reality's center. Yet the proliferation suggests deep cultural penetration. The great old ones have become recognizable enough for mass merchandising. Academic conferences on Lovecraft occur regularly, drawing literature scholars, philosophers, and cultural critics. Necronomicon, held in Providence, Rhode Island, combines academic panels with fan celebration. The conference demonstrates how Lovecraft's work supports serious scholarly investigation while maintaining subcultural fanish energy. Papers analyze Lovecraft's relationship to modernity, his influence on contemporary literature, and theoretical applications of cosmic horror to philosophy and political theory. The question of whether commodification and academic legitimation destroy what made the great old ones effective remains open. Once Cthulhu appears on t-shirts, once universities teach Lovecraft in literature courses, once the mythology becomes mastered canon rather than fragmentary mystery, does the horror survive? Or does familiarity inevitably domesticate what was designed to terrify through unknowability? Different audiences answer differently. For some, academic study deepens appreciation without eliminating dread. Understanding how Lovecraft constructed cosmic horror enhances recognition of its continued cultural power. For others, analysis drains mystery, turning living nightmare into historical artifact. The great old ones become objects of study rather than sources of existential unease. Both responses are valid. The mythology is now large enough to support multiple simultaneous relationships: scholarly analysis and visceral dread, ironic memes and genuine philosophical engagement, commercial merchandise and underground art. This pluralism itself might be most Lovecraftian outcome. The great old ones have exceeded any single interpretative framework, becoming too vast and multifaceted for unified understanding. The great old ones persist in cultural consciousness because they address anxieties that remain acute despite, or because of, technological and scientific advancement. Cosmic horror resonates in the 21st century for reasons both continuous with Lovecraft's era and specific to our current moment. The Anthropocene presents humanity with Lovecraftian realization. We have become geological force capable of altering planetary systems while remaining incapable of controlling the consequences. Climate change operates at scales and timescales that exceed human governance structures. We can measure carbon parts per million, project temperature increases, and model feedback loops. But this knowledge does not translate into effective action. We know catastrophe approaches and cannot prevent it. This is precisely the epistemic position Lovecraft's narrators occupy. They correlate information, recognize pattern, understand the threat, and remain helpless. The great old ones will wake when stars are right, regardless of human resistance. Climate systems will shift past tipping points regardless of insufficient mitigation efforts. Both scenarios present knowledge without power, awareness without agency. The temporal scale compounds the horror. Climate change operates across decades and centuries, timescales difficult for human psychology to process. Evolution equipped us to respond to immediate threats: predators, famine, interpersonal conflict. We struggle to maintain urgency about processes that unfold across generations. Similarly, the great old ones operate across geological epochs. Cthulhu sleeps for millions of years. Human civilization is brief fever dream in cosmic timeline. This scale comparison renders human concerns cosmically trivial, whether the threat is fictional entity or actual climate physics. Scientific materialism produces its own cosmic horror. Lovecraft wrote when Einstein's relativity and expanding universe models were revolutionizing cosmology. We now have dark matter, dark energy, quantum mechanics, multiverse hypotheses. Each advance reveals that reality operates according to principles more alien than previous understanding suggested. 95% of the universe consists of matter and energy we cannot directly observe. Quantum superposition suggests reality exists in probabilistic states until observation collapses them into definite configurations. The universe may be one bubble in infinite multiverse. These discoveries do not comfort. They reveal that human perception accesses narrow band of actual reality. We evolved to perceive wavelengths and scales relevant to survival, not truth. This is Lovecraftian epistemology. Human cognitive frameworks are insufficient for understanding cosmic reality. Scientific method extends our perception, but each extension reveals how much remains imperceptible. Digital age information overload creates conditions resembling Lovecraftian forbidden knowledge. The internet provides access to effectively infinite information, much of it contradictory, some of it true, much false, all available simultaneously. The problem is not information scarcity, but information excess. Humans cannot process the available data. We cannot distinguish signal from noise at scale. Conspiracy theories proliferate because pattern, recognition, cognitive tool that enhanced survival, misfires when confronted with more information than it evolved to handle. Lovecraft's narrators face similar epistemological crisis. They discover fragments of cosmic knowledge in multiple disconnected sources and attempt synthesis. The synthesis succeeds, revealing pattern, but the pattern drives them mad. They have correlated contents their minds cannot accommodate. Contemporary information ecology produces parallel experience. You can correlate information across thousands of sources, recognize patterns in global events, and arrive at conclusions, true or false, that destabilize your relationship to consensus reality. The appeal of cosmic insignificance in therapeutic culture seems paradoxical, but becomes comprehensible on examination. Contemporary Western culture emphasizes individual potential, personal growth, and agency. You can achieve your goals through effort. You are responsible for your happiness. Failure reflects personal inadequacy rather than systemic constraints. This framework produces enormous psychological pressure. Cosmic horror offers escape through opposite philosophy. Nothing matters because everything is cosmically insignificant. Your failures are irrelevant. Your successes are irrelevant. Vast forces beyond your comprehension or control determine outcomes. This is not empowering, but it is relieving. If Azathoth's dream constitutes reality, if human concerns are provincial delusions, then your personal anxiety becomes cosmically trivial. This converts existential dread into existential relief through radical acceptance of meaninglessness. The philosophical tension between nihilism and absurdism finds expression through the great old ones. Nihilism holds that existence lacks inherent meaning. Discovering this truth should eliminate basis for action. Why do anything if nothing matters? Absurdism, particularly Camus' formulation, acknowledges meaninglessness but advocates creating personal meaning through action despite cosmic indifference. The universe does not care. Therefore, you are free to care about what you choose. Lovecraft's work tends toward nihilism. His narrators who discover cosmic truth typically respond with despair, madness, or suicide. They cannot act meaningfully once they recognize action's cosmic futility. Contemporary appropriations often shift toward absurdism. Yes, the great old ones render human concerns insignificant. Now what? You still exist, you still experience, you still must act. Cosmic insignificance becomes liberating rather than paralyzing. This shift represents either maturation of cosmic horror philosophy or domestication of its radical implications, depending on perspective. Lovecraft's uncompromising nihilism is philosophically consistent, but psychologically unsustainable. Absurdist reinterpretation makes cosmic horror livable, but perhaps sacrifices its most disturbing insights. The question is whether cosmic horror should be livable, or whether its value lies precisely in presenting philosophy too terrible for functional adoption. Climate change, mentioned earlier, connects to broader category of slow violence, harm that occurs gradually across time and space, invisible in any single moment, but catastrophic in aggregate. Rob Nixon's concept of slow violence describes environmental destruction, toxic accumulation, and systemic oppression that unfold too slowly for human attention spans. The Great Old Ones embody slow violence mythologically, threats that operate across timescales incompatible with human urgency, that cannot be fought with immediate action, that accumulate inevitably toward catastrophic threshold. This makes them apt metaphors for contemporary crises, not just climate change, but antibiotic resistance, soil depletion, microplastic accumulation, biodiversity collapse. These threats share characteristics. They result from human activity. They operate at scales difficult to perceive. Directly, they will produce catastrophic consequences, and they resist simple solutions. Like the Great Old Ones, they are already here, already active, already shaping conditions for future catastrophe. Why won't these stories fade? Because the anxieties they address are not resolved. Scientific advancement reveals cosmic insignificance with increasing clarity. Climate crisis demonstrates human inability to collectively address existential threats. Information technology proves consciousness vulnerable to data it cannot process. Global systems operate according to principles beyond individual or even national control. The Great Old Ones provide vocabulary for these experiences. They give form to formless dread, mythology to meaninglessness. Lovecraft created them as horror fiction, but they function as philosophy, as psychology, as political metaphor. Their durability lies in their flexibility. They can represent whatever vast, indifferent, incomprehensible force currently threatens human meaning. The comfort of cosmic horror, finally, is its honesty. Traditional religion promises cosmic purpose. Humanism promises human significance. Cosmic horror promises nothing except accurate acknowledgement of reality's indifference. This might seem pessimistic, but it is at minimum not dishonest. The Great Old Ones do not pretend to care. They do not offer false hope. They represent universe as it is, vast, ancient, indifferent, operating according to principles that occasionally produce consciousness as byproduct before continuing toward heat death. Whether this philosophy is worth adopting, whether it reflects genuine insight or depressive distortion, remains contested. But its persistence across century, its proliferation across media, and its deepening cultural penetration suggest it addresses something real in human experience of modernity. We live in an age of cosmic horror, aware of our insignificance, unable to act effectively on that awareness, watching catastrophes unfold at scales our psychology cannot properly process. The Great Old Ones wait, not for anything, not toward any purpose. They simply wait, as they have waited, as they will continue waiting after we are gone. This is the final implication Lovecraft embedded in his mythology. Existence continues with or without human participation. Reality does not require our understanding, our approval, or our survival. This knowledge is, as his narrator observed, the most merciful thing the human mind usually fails to correlate. But once correlated, once understood, it cannot be forgotten. The Great Old Ones become permanent residents of consciousness, waiting in the depths of awareness for stars to align,